Jimmie Rogers took over one of the most challenging positions in all of college football with over 50 players leaving Iowa State. But now that he has the opportunity to build his team the way he sees fit, he is on an absolute heater, bringing in unbelievable talent for next season.
You are Locked On Cyclones, your daily podcast on the Iowa State Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, now the #1 sports podcast network. I'm your host, Nick Marovets. Thank you for making this your first watch or listen of the day. I appreciate it more than you know. Be sure to hit subscribe down below so we can prove once and for all that it is, in fact, a Cyclone State. As today, we are talking exclusively about the transfer portal. Jimmie Rogers has stepped up to the plate and has delivered an absolute heater of a class so far. So I can't wait to dive into individual players, strategy. We're going to start on the defensive side and kind of attack a few names that stand out just defensively and what I think Jimmie Rogers is doing strategy-wise. Then we'll pivot and talk just about the offensive side, do the exact same thing. A few players, general strategy I think Jimmie Rogers is going with, because there is one, believe it or not. And then finally, in the third segment, we're going to take a look at everything we laid out, okay? Where we're doing things really well, where we're maybe missing a few things. And I'm going to bring up a few players that I think Iowa State needs to target, either names that have a really good shot at coming over or some really talented players that I think Iowa State would benefit from having on the roster. Can't wait to dive into all of that and probably a few tangents here and there. But let's go ahead and start on the defensive side of the ball. The first thing I want to bring up is the fact that right now, as of time of recording, like this could definitely shift because the portal is still open and it's very fast moving. But as of time of recording, 23 commits for Iowa State, 10 of which, by my count, on the defensive side of the ball. So just under half, but that's basically right down the middle. That is about as even as it can get. I mean, maybe one, maybe two more. It's right around that 50% mark, though. And when I'm talking about even, just a very clean spread, Jimmie Rogers is doing that across the positions on the defensive side of the ball as well. I split the defense up into defensive line, linebacker, safeties, and cornerbacks. Now, I understand you could split the defensive line up a little bit. You could split the linebackers a little bit more. You could go left, right, corner. I went with those four. That's a little bit more split than my traditional method. But when you split it up into defensive line, linebackers, safeties, and cornerbacks, Jimmie Rogers has basically the same amount of transfers in every position. 2 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, 3 safeties, and 2 corners. Okay. Now, you'll probably notice 1 defensive line, 1 linebacker, and then 2 secondary groups. Why would I split it up that way? Okay, well, that's fair. Let's go ahead and chunk it down to how I normally split up a defense. Defensive line, linebacker, and then the secondary as a whole. Well, when you do that, Iowa State then has 5 players in the secondary to the 3 at linebacker or the 2 at defensive line. And I bring that up because while this is relatively evenly split, right? I know you could argue like defensive line, interior versus edge, inside linebacker, outside linebacker, Sam, Will, Mike, like you can get really into the weeds here. But generally speaking, Jimmie Rogers has done a very good job of bringing in transfers all across the defense pretty evenly. But if he's going to, kind of cater to one position, it's going to be the secondary. It's going to be the pass defense, right? We generally know how the defense works as a unit, but the secondary is a smart place for Jimmie Rogers to go ahead and attack right now because of the amount of guys that are leaving Iowa State in the portal in the secondary. I mean, we know how many injuries there were just this last season, but then the portal came and it got even worse. So just from a strategy standpoint, relatively even spread, right? It looks like your bagel in the morning. I mean, pretty much just cream cheese all throughout. There's little nooks, little crannies here and there. Make sure you fill those in. But for the most part, it's pretty flat across the top. Defensive line, linebacker, and then cornerback, safety, pretty much even. But then when you look at it as the secondary is one piece, it does make sense that, of course, Jimmie Rogers would target them just slightly different. That being said, they're the first player I want to bring up on the defensive side of the ball comes from the secondary and especially explicitly the safety position. I have 4 names that I'm going to bring up really quick. Braden Alls is the first one. He's a junior from Toledo. He's 6 foot tall, 196 pounds. And this guy could be a huge addition for Iowa State in the secondary position. Of course, the first thing I want to bring up is, of course, this comes as a package deal now, effectively, with Ross Watson, who came over from Toledo. And it sounds like he's going to be working directly with, safeties, corners, that whole secondary unit, defensive passing game kind of coordinator. And I think that this makes a lot of sense. You're bringing over a familiar face for Ross Watson to deal with, and Braden Alls is working with a coach that he is familiar with. It's a win-win situation. Over the last 3 years, there is a peak season in here for Alls, but last season wasn't bad either. 2023 was kind of his first introductory year. Then in 24, had a very solid year, honestly. And in 2025, slight step back, but only in a few categories. Let's talk about it. 30 solo tackles this last season, 4 passive defense. The passes defended is kind of the best way to put that. Had a half a sack, so was in the backfield, forced a fumble, and had 5 interceptions just this last year. That's a really solid stat line for a safety, honestly. And then in 2024 was slightly better with 42 solo tackles, He had 2 more passes defended, so a total of 6, and he had 4 interceptions in 2024. So ended up with 1 more interception. I understand that defensive backs, it's a very tricky position to evaluate because the more the ball is being thrown their way, the more likely, or at least the more confident the quarterback feels throwing to them. But also then you got to accommodate for, do they only have 1 star receiver? Is Alls on him the entire game? Are they forcing their star receiver the ball? If they are throwing to him 30 times, out of those 30, how many times is he making plays? Is that why his stats are so high? There's a bunch of question marks when it comes to evaluating the secondary. Nonetheless, I do think Alls, from what I have seen in these stats, this is a name to look out for next season. Next name I want to bring up comes from, Washington State. We are having a relatively high number of Washington State guys come over, and that's to be expected because where did Jimmie Rogers coach last season? Washington State. This freshman, Sullivan Schlimgen, the defensive linebacker for Washington State last season, could be a name to look out for over the next few years. Getting a young guy in the building, I think is very exciting. Obviously, someone that believed in Jimmie Rogers prior to his trip over to Iowa State, and somebody then I think will stay with Iowa State for the next few years because I don't anticipate Jimmie Rogers going anywhere. In just last season alone, as a freshman, 29 assisted, but 20 solo tackles, bringing his total to 49 basically total tackles on the year, 49 plays where he was involved. That is a really solid year as a freshman. So I'm very excited about the potential there. That's why I bring him up in this conversation. And another guy that I'm very excited about the potential for is Keon Washington. He comes from the cornerback position, though. So we're back into the secondary. He had 24 solos and 3 passes defended last season and 1 sack as well. Then 13 other times he was a kind of a part of the tackle. Another young guy, I think we're going to see, he's from Bowling Green at 6'1", 185. It's not a huge cornerback. I mean, he's still got some size to him. I'm about 6'1", so I have a relative understanding of that, just as being a human. It's still, to me, I've never been 6'9", but I feel like I'm still low enough to the ground where I can kind of make a move here and there and keep up with somebody. Not that I was ever a good corner, but my point being you can be a little bit more reactive at 6'1", as opposed to 6'4", 6'5", really, really lanky. I'm excited about this freshman and Keon Washington on the defense side of the ball. And the last name I want to bring up comes from Washington State as well. He is a safety. So I did put 3, secondary level players in here. Duran Goodman is coming over as a junior from Washington State at 6', 185. Last season had 3 solo tackles, 5 assists. I know it's not super, super impressive, but it is a name that I am looking out for at the secondary position to make some noise. Just in general, this secondary, I think, it's going to take a little bit of work. I don't think it's going to be what it's been the last 2 years. Obviously, Iowa State was very, very low in the secondary, but it can get back to that point with what Ross Watson's doing, what Jesse Bobbitt is doing, and then Jimmie Rogers is doing as the head coach. I think entirely this defense can be very, very good for Iowa State moving forward. And those were just a few of the names. Like I said, there's some defensive linemen that I didn't bring up, other linebackers. This transfer portal class is only getting stronger, and Jimmie Rogers is shocking me with the moves he's making. But on the defensive side of the ball, honestly, in comparison to the offense, the defense looks weak, which is it's a good thing because that means the offense is extremely strong. And I'm going to tell you about who's coming over offensively coming up right after this. But first, a word from our friends over at Rocket Money. Come on, let's be real. Managing your finances can feel very overwhelming between subscriptions you forgot about, bills that keep going up, and trying to figure out where all your money actually goes every month. Trust me, I get that. It feels like you're losing control sometimes, and you have to keep track of every transaction or hunt down hidden fees. Like, how are you going to do that? Well, Rocket Money. That's where Rocket Money comes in. The personal finance app that helps you take control. It finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. For me personally, I am just terrible about understanding what my subscriptions are, where they're going. I was shocked when Rocket Money showed me exactly what I was forgetting about. It's always way more subscriptions than I want to admit, so I'm just not going to here. But Rocket Money opened my eyes and allowed me to better understand what my finances looked like. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/lockedon. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. I am super duper ultra excited about this offensive class that Jimmie Rogers has put together in this transfer portal, and I can't wait to talk about it here at Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. But first, I just want to let you guys know kind of a little thing we're doing here, and thank you for making Locked On Cyclones your first listen or watch every single day. Thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. None of this would be possible without you. And that being said, we put together this little everydayer club. I'm just going to tell you about it really quick. It gets you access to an an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Cyclones wherever you listen to your podcast, and an invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server. If you have a pen and paper ready, I have the link. It's lockedoncyclones.supercast.com. It's also in the show notes below. You can click on it, after you get done listening today, or if you're watching on YouTube, in the description. Just thank you guys so much. I appreciate every single one of you. Let's talk about this offense, huh? We talked about the defense, about 10 of the 23 transfers on the defensive side of the ball. That means roughly, give or take, if my math is correct, 13 of the 23 would be on the offensive side of the ball. And a couple of names in here I am super thrilled to talk about, especially when we consider the fact that yesterday we were just talking about how really is it a smart play for Jimmie Rogers to target these smaller schools and build up a Power 4 Big 12 program through FCS, through honestly, schools like Iowa Western churn out some high-level talent. Look at back-to-back Jet Award winner Caden Weegan out of Iowa Western. But my point being, is it best to go through MAC schools? And I do think that there is an argument there. And if you want to hear it, I talked about it yesterday. I do think that there is a path there, but you have to bring in some top-level talent at some point. And Jimmie Rogers has done that. Let's talk about where, explicitly, offensive line. By my count, 6 or 7 offensive linemen. I'm pretty sure I counted 6, but I have 7 tally marks here. Regardless, they blow every other position out of the water. On offense, 6 or 7 offensive linemen, 1 tight end, 3 wide receivers, and 1 quarterback by my count. Okay. And of those offensive linemen, you've got some really big names. Oklahoma offensive lineman Jake Taylor, starter when healthy for an SEC team coming over to where? Iowa State? Ooh, look out. But that's not all. No, that's not all. DeAndre Carter from Auburn, an offensive lineman who, once it was announced that he was transferring, Zach Blackerby of Locked On Auburn immediately texted me, said, hey, this is a big pickup for you guys. He would have been a starter if he stayed this year. So we've got 2 SEC starter linemen on our roster. I mean, that is just incredible. A few other names on here. Tarleton State, Braden Smith was a first-team FCS All-American freshman. I mean, the names just keep coming on the offensive line. And the reason I want to talk about it is the offensive line is clearly where Jimmie Rogers is targeting as far as positions on the offensive side of the ball. And we talked a little bit about, what Jalen Rayner could be for Iowa State and how he could kind of be this running quarterback who's going to be a threat, and Iowa State's probably going to run the ball a lot. Well, you have to have a good offensive line to do that, and that is clearly a point of emphasis for Jimmie Rogers. We kind of knew this after his initial press conference, and I thought a lot of that would come through high school recruiting, but we're seeing it immediately in the transfer portal as well. As I mentioned, a couple other positions, 1 tight end. We know Jalen Rayner's the quarterback, and 3 wide receivers. So I wanted to tell you about a few of them here, 2 wide receivers. Let's go ahead and start with our tight end that has committed from Arkansas State, Tyler Fortenberry. First off, awesome last name. But the connection between Jalen Rayner and Tyler Fortenberry, I think, is going to be a very legitimate piece of the puzzle for next season for Iowa State, standing at 6'5", 240 pounds, a very large frame. His stats this last season, he ended up with 32 receptions for 294 yards. That's an average of about 9 yards per reception and 2 touchdowns. Nothing too crazy. Nothing too crazy in the receiving game, I should say. But I think that the prior, kind of teammate chemistry between Tyler Fortenberry and Jalen Rayner is going to be big for this next season. And I do expect him to kind of take a step forward in the passing game. I know that it's a very troubling situation we're in here. It's very easy to look at, a guy like Tyler Fortenberry and say, well, look at what Burkle and Bramer did last season. Well, we don't really have any of that coaching staff returning. So there's not really any point of that where I would say, oh yeah, that's a, you can make that continuation. I think this is a totally separate thing, but I do expect the way that the offense is going to be run with a extremely, run heavy kind of style that's going to allow for some pop passes, some tight end releases. I am excited to see what Tyler Fortenberry can do. A couple other names that I want to bring up on the offense side of the ball. Cody Jackson, a wide receiver from Tarleton State, a guy that I am super pumped about, spent 2021 at OU, so started in the SEC, then the last 2 years at Tarleton State, amassed a total of 82 receptions for basically 1,300 yards, just shy of 1,300 yards, 800 yards this last season and 6 touchdowns. He had 8 of his touchdowns in 2024. He's making the jump up at 6'4", 175, a name to look out for as a receiver. And then another Washington State guy, Carter Papps, a young player, a freshman this last season, will be coming to Iowa State with 9 receptions, 168 yards, and a touchdown. That's an average of 18.7 yards per reception there. Definitely a name to look out for. This wide receiver room got completely gutted. So, later at some point, I'll have to basically make my predictions on who I think is going to be the wide receiver 1 moving forward. I'm guessing there will be a few other wide receivers who are brought in. And if it'll be a tight end or if it'll be a wide receiver, what it's going to look like, because obviously this last season, my prediction was the tight ends would kind of dominate the passing game. But as of right now, with those names coming over, I am extremely excited about what Jalen Rayner has to work with. He's going to probably be a bit of a running guy, but he has options in the passing game as well. That being said, he's a bit of a running guy. Well, who's going to be alongside him? Nobody in the portal right now for Iowa State as far as running backs go. So unless they are planning to rely on like Aiden Flora, they need to bring somebody in. Who will that be? I'm going to tell you right here after this. So we've talked about what Jimmie Rogers is doing here for Locked On for the Cyclones here at Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And generally, I like the strategy so far from Jimmie Rogers. Now, we are nowhere near the portal being done, being wrapped up. The portal isn't even closed yet. Players can technically still enter the portal for a few more days, something like roughly 10 days or whatever. But Jimmie Rogers seems to be targeting the offensive line and the secondary in general. Now, obviously putting some focus on the defensive line as well, and I think he wants to win in the trenches, but there is in my opinion, a clear, definitive target on the offensive line and the secondary, which I really like. But I am a little bit concerned about the fact that there are no running backs committing to Iowa State yet. And I have a few other names that I want to throw out there as well as we wrap up today's show about, or as far as like guys that I want on Iowa State next season. There were some names that were thrown out early, but they're huge names. Guys like Nick Marsh out of Michigan State. Like, yeah, it would have been really cool if he was a Cyclone next season, but it's really going to be tough to get guys like that to commit. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I was watching the FCS championship game last night, Illinois State, Montana State, unbelievable game. Okay. Just cinema, the way that game ended. If you haven't already, go back. If you can watch the whole thing, watch the whole thing. If you need to watch the highlights, I don't know if the highlight reel is long enough, honestly, to include everything. It was an unbelievable game. And two names stood out to me while watching that. And I'm going to be completely honest with you. I did not watch a ton of FCS football prior to this championship game. Okay. A few games here and there, but not quite enough to have a full-blown scouting report. But Dylan Lord and Taco Dowler are two dudes that are just weapons for Montana State and for Illinois State. Two names. They're both wide receivers that I would love to see on Iowa State next season. But based on the amount of wide receivers that Jimmie Rogers has gotten already and the fact that they've just played each other in the FCS championship game, maybe we just pick one, right? Maybe we just go with one. I think between the two, you're probably going to get a really solid receiver either way. Lord ended up with 13 receptions for 161 yards and 2 touchdowns, while Dowler had 8 receptions for 111 and 1 touchdown. They were just unbelievable. Lord, obviously a lot younger, Dowler, a junior. Look, if you get either of those, I would be very excited. But that's just a wide receiver. And obviously you start to wonder about the transition from FCS to the Power 4 level. Just 2 wide receivers that I'm looking out for. As far as running backs, because this is the point that I've kind of been making up until this point, I have 2 on my list. Cam Cook from Jacksonville State at 5'11", a little bit of a smaller back, not quite like is similar in size to Abu Sama, just doesn't really remind me of him, I guess, but he has 1,700 yards last season. I mean, that's incredible. Went from TCU to Jacksonville State in 2023 and 24 with TCU. He had a total of 516 yards or so, 18 yards. So nothing too crazy. Then he transfers to Jacksonville State, has almost 1,700 yards on almost 300 carries and 16 touchdowns. And then it's like, yeah, I think I'm still pretty good. So I'm going to go back into the portal. A name to look out for. Definitely. I don't know if we can snag him, but a name to look out for. Another name that I don't think we should sleep on at the running back position is Ashton Gray. Okay. You're probably looking at his stats saying, wait, last year he only rushed for 377 yards on North Texas. Why would he be on your list of targets? Well, when you look at what North Texas did last season, their leading rusher, he's not their main guy. Caleb Hawkins was the main guy for North Texas last season. He had 1,400 yards on 231 carries. Okay. Ashton Gray was the number 3 guy as far as rushing stats goes. But when you look at averages, it was Caleb Hawkins at 6.2. Who was he outrushed by average-wise? Ashton Gray at 6.5. He was the leading rusher other than a wide receiver who had 2 carries on the season. Miles Coleman had two carries for 22 yards, so his average was 11 yards per carry. But Ashton Gray was the leading rusher as far as averages go for the North Texas Mean Green last season. A name to look out for. Okay, just somebody to keep on the radar as a freshman at 6 foot tall, 208 pounds. A lot of room to develop. If he has the line that Iowa State is fielding in front of him, I think he could be a legit threat moving forward. A couple of other names on the edge. I like Adam Trick and Sahir West. I think we probably need to get a few real legitimate pass rushers off the edge, and I think that those 2 guys are really solid. And then Kenny Worth the third from Wazoo, from Washington State, is another name to look out for. He's a guy that I just think is really likely to end up coming over. It's not really about whether or not I think he's a good fit. I do think he does fit, but I would say that he's more than likely going to come over with the amount of Washington State guys that are transferring. Just keep an eye out for him. Let's talk about Adam Trick a little bit as I ran through that list. Adam Trick last season, and he's a junior, had a total of 25 solo tackles, 34 assists, leading it to a total of 59, 4 passes defended, and 8.5 sacks for Adam Trick last season. Look, Iowa State feels like we've gotten into this thing of like, we don't really care if we get sacks. We talked about this. It's from Miami, Ohio. Adam Trick can come in and cause havoc. I'm sick of the whole concept where we're not going to have sacks and we're going to drop 8. And look, if we're going to run a 4-man front, let's get after the quarterback a little bit here. That's kind of the point of doing a 4-man front. I do think Adam Trick can do that. Another guy, young guy, Sahir West out of JMU, looking to transfer, had 7 sacks last season. 4 passes defended, 45 total tackles on 16 solos. Another guy to look out for. Look, the reason I bring both of them in here is I just want to see I just want to see some disruption for the quarterbacks. And the way that the Big 12 is going with, really mobile guys, you have to cause stress back there and force them to throw on the run. And if they can, great. And if they can get upfield, awesome. That's where we have linebackers and safeties and corners in the game for. But if you don't have any pressure on the quarterback all game, they're going to get into grooves. And I feel like we saw that a lot this last season. There was just not a ton of urgency. We talked about it, I think it was the offseason, when John Haycock was like, look, we're not really trying to sack people. I'm like, why not? Sacks are like more influential than turnovers. I feel like that feels like something we should probably be targeting. And it does feel like there is going to be an emphasis on that with the 4-man front that Jimmie Rogers is putting down. But I want to see those two guys explicitly, obviously from smaller schools. I think they can make the jump up, and especially if they have some support from a really solid secondary and a really solid linebacker room. I like those two guys. Now back to Kenny Worth. The third is a young dude, a freshman. Last season had 23 total tackles on 13 solos, had a pass defended and a forced fumble for Washington State. 6 foot, 177 cornerback. Obviously nothing too crazy there as far as lanky or stats. Just a young guy that I think translates well. Obviously Jesse Bobbitt, the defensive coordinator out at Washington State, going to know how to use Kenny Worthy. I think he'll fit into the system great. And I think it's a high likelihood transfer, why I wanted to throw him on this list. But overall, I do think that I want to throw this out here. I think Jimmie Rogers is doing a really good job. I think he's absolutely nailed the portal, and there isn't like a but or an and or whatever. Like, I just genuinely do think, especially with what Jimmie Rogers has been dealt, he is killing it right now. I don't have the list up in front of me, but on 24/7 Sports, Iowa State really isn't that far outside of the top 15, I think. They're like 17, I thought, or something the last time I checked as far as this class of transfer portal. Really solid showing for what Jimmie Rogers has done, as far as a start to this Iowa State era or regime or whatever you want to call it. And these are just a few names that I wanted to throw out as at least targets. I'm really excited. I think Ashton Gray could be a huge pickup. I think Dylan Lord, as young as he is, and the impact that he made in that FCS championship game, like, keep an eye out for him. But if Jimmie Rogers doesn't sign any of these guys, I would not call this class a failure. So far, this has been phenomenal. And while it does sting losing a ridiculous amount of guys to the portal, over 50 players going into the portal for Iowa State, that kind of means more than likely you're going to get about 50 guys in the portal, which is super exciting. Every single one of them you can take a look at, and there's a lot of hope there, right? With the guys that have already been on the team, you kind of know what to expect. And some of them, it's a very good thing, right? Like Kyle Conradi, we expect 54-yarders. We expect 60-yarders, which is crazy to say at the college level. But when you bring in a new wide receiver, there's just so much hope there, right? When you bring in a new quarterback, like, oh man, imagine all the things he could do. So this is a really fun time and a very hopeful and exciting time. And Jimmie Rogers is killing it. So far, up until this is January 6th, this class is looking really solid. And I do think that Iowa State is going to have a really good shot at least winning a fair amount of games next season. Once this all wraps up, I'll probably give my full prediction. But today it feels a lot better to know there's an Auburn guy, there's an Oklahoma guy, and some really talented guys from the lower levels that Jimmie Rogers is putting together. And then as Iowa State starts to win more and more and more, guess what? Bigger, better players come to play for the Cyclones. That being said, that's going to be it for today. Thank you so much for making this your first watch or listen. I appreciate every single one of you. If you haven't already, hit subscribe. It's completely free. It's proven it's a Cyclone State. It's a win-win for everybody. Until next time, Cyclone fans, sayonara.